The Wes Penra Papers. A Journey Through the Multiverse. The First Level of Learning. wespenry.com. Present and Future Challenges, PFC, Section. PFC Paper Number 3, New Revelations on the Story About the Wingmakers, the Labyrinth Group, and S.A.A.L.M. 1. Abstract. This is a hot potato. When I'm writing these words, I am still not exactly sure how to approach these related subjects. Many people have read the Wingmakers material, WMM. And many have been very inspired by it. Others have come out and proclaimed that it's all a hoax. Here is news for everybody who reads this: it's not a hoax. However, it's a pretty complicated issue, and there are a lot of organizations and agendas connected to it. So I am going to tell you the real story behind the Wingmakers to the best of my ability, how it is connected to both LPGC, Life Physics Group in California. The Labyrinth Group. Allegedly in California, but a reliable anonymous source is telling me U.S. East Coast, NSA, National Security Agency, ACIO, Advanced Contact Intelligence Organization, and SAALM. Supreme Anunnaki Assembly of Lord Marduk, Pine Gap, Australia. The last three are all connected, as we shall see. The whole Wingmakers issue runs through the military-industrial complex and all the way to the top, as they say, but it didn't used to be that way. Confused yet? Good, because that's what they want you to be. So let's see how we can hopefully make it clearer with this paper. 2. How the Wingmakers saga all began. First of all, who am I to think I am able to shed some light to this confusing issue? Well, for a couple of reasons, actually. The WMM fascinated me from the first time I read it, and has ever since. For a long time I was absolutely hooked on it, like so many other people before and after me. And when someone gets that hooked on it, there is more than a little truth in it. I quoted, elaborated on, and used a lot of the material on the previous version of my website, wespenry.com, and I made the connection to so many other subjects I had been researched earlier. Then, happenstances took me on a journey which made me doubt at least some of the WMM. So I started pulling the strings, and what I found out was quite astounding. But more important than that, I got much of it relayed to me from the horse's mouth, Dr. Anderson, who was the instigator of the WMM in 1998. I know where he is, but the circumstances are such that I can't reveal it in public at this moment. However, he has relayed to me the incredible story of the Wingmakers material. 2.1 What is myth and what is true? Here is the key. People have, since the first Wingmakers site launched in 1998, had a problem with that the WMM is supposedly both myth and truth mixed into the storyline, like has been done so often by fantasy and science fiction writers. Of course, the discussions have been, what is true and what is fable? Well, if we know how certain controlling forces work to obscure true information, we also know that they often put out the truth in plain sight to blind us. It's a little mind game they are playing. Let me explain how this was done. I know that many people who read these words have already read the WMM, whether it's the original version, the later version, or both. Either way, I urge you to read this whole paper from beginning to end, because hardly any reader of the WMM has read it from the perspective I am now going to present it. I want to start from the beginning, with the original Dr. Anderson interviews, published in late 1998. Once the current version was published on the internet, the original one was taken down. Luckily, there were people like former White House employee, Fred Burke, www.wanttoknow.info/right/, who had downloaded the whole original website and liked it so much that he created his own domain, wingmakers.us. Thus, the original site is still available to the public. Dr. Anderson is of course a made-up name, used by a true defector from the ACIO and the Labyrinth Group. What Dr. Anderson presented in his interview with Anne is true in the sense that the defector told her what he knew from the level it had been presented to him within the organization in which he once belonged, see later in this paper. However, he did withhold some of what he knew and hid some of it by speaking in mythological and symbolical terms, probably both to protect himself, and due to the fact that if you want to teach a child quantum physics, you don't start him/her out with the higher math. He also changed the names of the ET group, the Quartum, a few dates, and a few other things, for what he considered good reasons, but my point is, Dr. Anderson was genuine. 2.2 How the Wingmakers site was found. For you who remember some of the early WMM, this is a refresher, and for the rest, here is the story. In 1972, according to the early material, the ancient Arrow, AA, site was found in New Mexico by a few young hikers. By coincidence, they found the caverns which led deep into the mountainside. These caverns were spreading out like veins from an aorta on both sides of a long tunnel. Each side tunnel ended in a chamber, 23 altogether, and these chambers all had artifacts in them. The young hikers were in awe because they figured what they saw couldn't be of this world. The site was of course quickly taken over by the U.S. military and isolated from the public. To make a long story short, the military came to the same conclusion as the hikers, that these artifacts, in form of out-of-this-world paintings, were something they'd never seen here on Earth before. Hence, the site was classified and the NSA, National Security Agency, took over from there and put an above top secret stamp on the project. Out of NSA, a secret organization had branched out, possibly already in the early 1950s, when the US government made treaties with alien races. This organization was called the ACIO, Advanced Contact Intelligence Organization, headquartered in Virginia, California according to the later WMM, with branches in Belgium, India, and Indonesia. The AA was incorporated by the ACIO, because they early on understood that these painting and other things they found in the chambers were not made by some old Indian tribe that suddenly may have left the area, although there were indicators that there indeed was an Indian tribe that all of a sudden, hundreds of years ago, disappeared in thin air in the area. The site was traced back to around 800 AD. When they further explored the caverns and the chambers, they found other artifacts besides the paintings, such as poetry, music discs, and a disc containing more than 8,000 pages with written material in a language not even the best linguists at the ACIO could decode. The Ancient Arrow project was put on ice for 22 years, due to that we didn't seem to have the technology to open the disc and decipher what was written on it. However, in the earlier part of the 1950s, a young genius hit the scientific field like a torpedo. He quickly outsmarted his professors to such a degree that they didn't want to have anything to do with him, it was too embarrassing. This young man with his long hair and ponytail simply refused to buy into the current scientific dogma. He wanted to build computers powerful enough to use for time travel, like something that was taken from a science fiction novel. Of course, he didn't get much response from the academia of that time. Although he was rejected by most professors, eccentric at best, and insane at worst, the ACIO quickly recognized his genius and hired him in 1956, when he was only 22 years old. He was literally obsessed with time travel, and no one knew for sure why he had this exclusive drive, perhaps it was a mystery even for himself. ACIO eventually put him on this above top secret project to develop blank slate technology, BST, which is a very specific type of time travel. He called it Freedom Key, which we will look into much more in a separate papers. We need to understand that the ACIO was the primary interface with alien technologies and how to adapt them into society as well as the military-industrial complex. When this young genius came into the picture, the ACIO was already savvy with some alien technologies, which they had gained access to via so-called Technology Transfer Programs, TTP, apparently starting in 1954, if not earlier, when President Eisenhower had an encounter with a faction of the Greys, which resulted in an exchange program where the U.S. government at the top level was given alien technology in exchange for abductions of a limited amount of humans for genetic experiments. 5. It needs to be noted, though, that not all Greys agreed with this exchange, but there is a faction of them, as mentioned in previous papers, whose purpose is to further develop their own genetics, using human DNA to help them accomplish this. The experiments done on abductees, mostly without their conscious consent, are often executed without even using anesthesia. In the abductor's own non-emotional state of mind, they look upon the human species as laboratory rats, no more, no less. However, we have traits in our DNA/RNA which are interesting to them. We have feelings and emotions. These are ancient traits which were put there by our original seeders, the Lyrans and other species they are interconnected with. This young genius, later known as 15, quickly became the head of the ACIO and its offshoot, the highly secretive Labyrinth Group, possibly located on the U.S. East Coast. As it were, he was contacted by two different ET races, whom were both willing to offer technology in exchange for something we have here on Earth that they wanted. One of the groups was the same Greys I mentioned above, and the other group is known in the WMM as the Kortum. 15 rejected the Greys but stayed with the Kortum. So who are the Kortum? Some say they are part of the Mardukian Anunnaki, left here on Earth and now connecting with this group of secret scientists. However, I said in the beginning that the ET issue is complicated. The A.A.M.I. and their Anunnaki work together with the reptilians and possibly the Greys on one level, while independent groups of the same basic race, splinter groups, work independently from those on Nibiru. This ET group, code-named the Kortum, is an old renegade group of the A.A.M.I, still living on a planet around Sirius B, but have been involved in TTP, technological transfer programs, for quite a while with the human U.S. government. They have now deceived this Sirius, otherwise human-friendly group of scientists into building a crystal and scalar mechanics-based weapons technology to prevent an alien invasion. They are after the 7 tributary sites, where New Mexico is only the first. They want to use something they call the 7 trumpets technologies to open up wormholes. The technology that the Kortum have inspired 15 and his Labyrinth Group to develop is to secretly, unbeknownst to the human group, reactivating the 7 Jehovian seals to allow an alien invasion. The Labyrinth Group has been led to believe that the opposite is true. If they, in cooperation with the Kortum, can develop this technology and find the Wingmakers sites, one by one, they may help them being able to avoid an alien invasion, which was scheduled for 2011, but has been slightly delayed. More about that later. The Greys offered a full-scale technology transfer program to 15 in exchange for genetic information of human DNA. The reason he turned them down was because of a previous agreement with the Kortum, who were the ones with the most advanced technology in 15's field, and hence more able to help him with his task. However, the Greys had something the Kortum lacked, their technology how to make memory implants, and skills in genetic hybridization. This may sound odd to the reader, because the A.A.M.I. had a lot of skills in genetic engineering, but what Sitchin is telling us on several occasions in his books is that not all A.A.M.I/Anunnaki have these skills. Just like we humans, only because we humans know how to build space shuttles doesn't mean all of us know how to build them. Only the rocket scientists and rocket engineers do, although we all gain from their knowledge. Same thing with genetic engineering, the A.A.M.I. Even those not from Nibiru, have their scientists/geneticists just like us, but even Marduk never had the knowledge how to genetically engineer species, it was not his field of expertise. And most probably, none of the members of the 200 in the Kortum group had this knowledge either, other than perhaps a general knowledge, not enough to create complicated species and/or manipulate their genes. In addition, the Kortum group is supposedly consisting of 200 members, but these are only the ones who show up for the meetings, so to speak. In the background, there is a huge amount of their kind, overlooking the process. Not even our government, on any level, is aware of that, I think. After been pondering over the Grey issue for some time, 15 and others within the Labyrinth Group started reconsider whether they should make an agreement with the Greys or not. After all, the Greys' technology could be useful, especially the memory implants, which could be used to create photographic memory in the group members. So they made a deal after all, and 15 got a lot of information on genetic hybridization from the Greys. Still, they apparently never told the Greys about the Labyrinth Group for several reasons. They didn't want the Greys and the Cortum to work together, perhaps that was the Cortum's idea not to work with the Greys, and the Greys had no need to know, so the Labyrinth Group officially worked with them outside the organization. 2.3. Dr. Anderson from the ACIO/Labyrinth Group, speaks out. In December 1997, a reporter by the pen name Ann got contacted by someone who said he was a linguist who had defected from the ACIO, or Special Projects Laboratory, as it was called then, an unacknowledged department of the NSA. He called himself Dr. Anderson for protection, albeit this was not his real name. Ann, a typical, dedicated journalist, was, rightfully so, very skeptic at first when Dr. Anderson told his story. He told her everything he knew as a top linguist, working under 15. Dr. Anderson had been a part of the first crew who explored the ancient Arrow site, and because he spoke multiple languages, some of them extinct, he became one of those in charge of translating the disc. Up to the day when Dr. Anderson defected, they had only translated about 7% of the 8,000+ pages, so he didn't have or little, knowledge of what the rest of the disc contained. After 15 had broken the code, which finally started the project, the Cortum, who had infiltrated the ACIO already in 1958, became part of the project and helped out with their technologies as well. 15 had found out that some of the material on the disk was Old Sumerian/Akkadian languages, plus a few others. Dr. Anderson, after had started his internship at the ACIO, was subjected to something called Intelligence Accelerator. He said they had the alien technologies to increase raw intelligence in a person by as much as 500%. In addition, they had this genetic implant technology, which they allegedly got from the Greys, which created photographic memory. The whole ACIO staff had been subjected to both, including Dr. Anderson himself. These technologies were held very secret and were not revealed to the government or the intelligence agencies. It was entirely on a need-to-know basis. To have access to this information, a person would have to have clearance level 12 or higher, highest is 14, with 15 being the only one having 15. Dr. Anderson had clearance 12. These high-level clearances is the Labyrinth Group. This group split from the ACIO to enable secrecy from the NSA and lower-ranking members of the ACIO. 15 was afraid that if too many people had access to the technology stemming from the TTPs, technology transfer programs, the chances are great that these technologies would be compromised and used against humanity's best interests. However, the Labyrinth Group is taking these technologies on a regular basis and dilutes them to a point where the ACIO can sell them to private industry and government agencies, probably via a network of contractors, to remain secret, including the military. This is a part of the reason for the speed up of technology the last few decades. So, we can see that the best interests for some groups or individuals are not considered best interest by others. It's all very subjective and in line with a group's imperatives. Speaking of secrecy, for more than 40 years now, the Labyrinth Group has accumulated considerable wealth on their own. They have been able to build their own security technologies which have thus far prevented any detection from intelligence agencies like the CIA, KGB, Mossad, or MI5 and MI6. The Cortum were permitted access to all of the information systems of the ACIO, which was considerable, according to Dr. Anderson, because they could be of assistance and were on slightly similar IQ level as 15, after the latter had had intelligence acceleration. He also said the Cortum are friendly and have no motives to take over our planet in some kind of one-world government agenda. However, he said that there is another alien race, who does have these motives, and we are going to talk more about them, the Anima, in a later paper. I have reason to believe that the Anima problem is a deception, and in the next paper I will explain why. Dr. Anderson also told us that the head of the Cortum alien race, working with the Labyrinth Group, goes under the name of Mahunahi, and that he actually liked this Kortum leader. Keep the name Mahunahi in memory. Dr. Anderson considered 15 the most powerful human on Earth due to his brilliance and his power. He was the first human who was subjected to accelerated intelligence and the memory implant, and in his case, from had already been brilliant, now had an intellect comparable to that of the Kortum and the Greys. Still, Dr. Anderson was portraying 15 and his 7 directors as benevolent, who in their own way have humankind's best interests in mind. The main problem Dr. Anderson had with them, though, was the secrecy. He thought this information should be in public domain. 2.4 The origins of the Wingmakers race. In a classified document, No. 040297-14XP17AA23, from Dr. Jeremy Sothers, Director of Special Projects, ACIO, to all Labyrinth Group members, FYEO, which described the Ancient Arrow project to the team, is telling them on page 2, that the Wingmakers originate from the Pleiades. He is also stating that they were the ones who originally seeded life upon Earth and facilitated life's evolutionary leaps and biological transformations. They, and the Lyrans' same genetic origins, see endnote number 6, were the human genotype, who brought with us a library of genetic codes that, through experimentation, produced the human species, but also most other life forms on Earth. The story of the original seeding of mankind can be reviewed in my Genesis paper number 1, Human Origins and the Living Library. Here we learn that the Pleiadians and the Lyrans are the same species. A faction of them fled to the Pleiades when the Anunnaki came, but returned to Earth and eventually started working together with the Anunnaki in their effort to manipulate the DNA of the early humans. At that point they most possibly interbred with the Anunnaki and created a new hybrid, making parts of the Pleiadian Lyrans also part of the Anunnaki species. We know very little about the origins of the Anunnaki, and they may just as well be a splinter group from the original Lyrans, before any of them had any encounters with planet Earth. The Pleiadian Wingmakers were in control of time travel technologies, and put time capsules here from a future time, in our terms. Their hope seems to have been that we will be able to connect to our future selves and grasp a greater understanding of human destiny, among other things. The renegade Pleiadian group, channeled by Barbara Marciniak, are here to steer us in a new direction, away from the technology transfer programs and back in connection with nature. They are here to do this because they live in a machine technology reality themselves, which is quite brutal, oppressive, and inhumane. In their efforts to do something about it, this group has managed to trace back their timeline to the nanosecond between 1987 to 2012, where humanity made decisions which created the hellish future this renegade group lives in. In the sense of ancestry, they are us in a future time, but also us in the past, and if we can make better choices now, it will also affect them positively, and by the same token we will be able to positively change our pasts. They call it healing along the lines of time. In their books and channeling session, they are emphasizing that we need to get away from electronics as much as possible, and get back to basics to become more multidimensional, like we once were. Instead of connecting to the internet, they want us to connect to our internet, which is our own psychic abilities. That's where the answers and the connection with the multiverse lie. The Wingmakers, whom, like we said, are also from the Pleiades, if we are to believe Dr. Sothers and the WMM, claim to have been the ones seeding the concept of the internet for the purpose of developing a global culture. They say they did it because it's the way to communicate globally amongst people on Earth, but also because it's going to be the universal communication device for us in the future, albeit in a much more advanced version, of course, in a form of an intragalactic, digital nervous system. The Wingmakers teach us that by the time their final time capsule is discovered in 2023, the internet will be the focal point of the new global culture. This statement alone, if true and not altered, is telling us that the Pleiadians, whom Dr. Sothers refers to as the Wingmakers, are not the same group as the one Barbara Marciniak is channeling. The latter wants us to get off the internet as much as possible and develop our internet instead. The Wingmakers website, in its current form, is promoting the internet as an intergalactic communication network. Beware of deception. We are going to talk about the internet a lot later on, but the superspeed internet is not developed for humans, but for aliens. For them to be able to use our technology here on Earth, it needs to be more sophisticated. We, in our current development, have little use for superspeed internet, do we? Think about it. The internet was developed to eventually work as a network meant to ultimately control mankind by certain alien species, not to be used by alien species in general. The Pleiadians Barbara Marciniak is channeling is warning us about the machine kingdom. If I didn't know better, I may have considered this as a fairly good communication device, just expand on what we have and connect to the intergalactic network. However, this is not the way aliens communicate with each other in general. Thus the distinction between the internet and the internet. The latter is what we need to develop more of, not the former. This is where this world is going to split in two, one where people are migrating to gigantic cities where technology has become a serious addiction and a suggestive way of survival, and the other where people who have had enough, start saying they don't want any more of machine technology and will move out in the country and perhaps open up their own, self-sufficient communities. There, due to lack of an abundance of electronics, people will be able to connect with their own internet, become more psychic and multidimensional. Go out in nature and notice the difference. It's not that there is anything wrong with technology in general, but at this point in time, where our bodies and minds have been so polluted by electronics, misuse of negative energy, and the effects of the TTP, we need to disconnect from the mindset of it, remove our biological life form from it, and go back and reconnect with the elements to regain our power and sovereignty over our own biokind. It's like a person who have been on the whole spectrum of addictive, recreational drugs for a long time and wants to quit. Big part of a successful recovery program would be not only to stop taking the drugs, but to disconnect from everything that reminds him of the drugs. It's imperative that humankind survives the next 100 to 125 years or so, which will be very challenging, but to do so, we need our inner awareness to guide us, so we are able to consciously direct our energies to create oases in a world of turmoil and destruction. How well we succeed with this will determine our survival potential as a species. What we do after that, in the sense of space travel and connecting with the galactic community, is a totally different matter. My own take of the Pleiadian agenda is to introduce to us the possibilities to make decisions not only based on survival but at the same time connect sub-quantum-wise to our internet, without technology. This is our key both to survival and enlightenment at the same time. Space travel is coming into the picture later, as does technology under responsible conditions. We need to go through withdrawals first, actually, in a literal manner. It's come to a point when people are addicted to their cell phones and Facebooks. I have heard stories where kids sleep with their cell phones under their pillows rather than their teddy bears, in case someone would text them during the night, and other kids have insomnia, because they think they'll miss a message on their Facebook and run up in the middle of the night to check it out. This is very serious, as we are losing our young generation to electronics. 2.5 Mark Hempel, The Middle Hand. Although Dr. Anderson only had a security clearance of 12 and probably got a watered-down version of the truth from the upper lines, he learned more than he felt comfortable with. He soon became the leading linguist and was the one who translated the disc from Sumerian. After had visited the ancient Arrow site a couple of times and experienced a presence in there, which he was sure was the Wingmakers themselves, and due to the translations, which he felt communicated directly to him, he knew this information needed to get out to the public, contrary to 15's clear intentions. Dr. Anderson felt it was his duty to do so, and the Wingmakers told him this while he was working on the project. They didn't want to bother 15 with it, because they considered him being way too involved with the courtroom to be able to see clearly. Dr. Anderson was nervous, because if he defected from the Labyrinth Group, something that was previously unheard of, he was afraid they were going to erase his memories so that everything he'd learned from when he joined the ACIO until the day he defected would disappear like it had never happened. Yes, they have the technology to do so. He knew this is probably what they would do, unless they wanted to find him and reprogram him, because he was such a brilliant linguist. There was even a chance they would kill him. In spite of these considerations, he decided to defect in secret, so he just left one day. He knew he didn't have much time and quickly needed this information to go out to the public. So he chose a random journalist, Anne, who could interview him and hopefully publish it in a newspapers, or magazine. Once the cat was out of the bag, Dr. Anderson had a better chance to survive and perhaps let him keep his memories. This was a delicate situation for 15 and his group, because he didn't want any extra attention drawn to him, and if the damage was done and the cat was let out of the bag, the best he could do was to be silent, in hope that this was too incredible for people to believe. The interaction between Anne and Dr. Anderson resulted in the Dr. Anderson interviews. They were supposed to be 5 in number, but after 2 interviews, Dr. Anderson disappeared and Anne was no longer able to get in touch with him. No one knew at the time if the Labyrinth Group got to him, if he was killed, had his memory erased, or just went underground. Anne, who was a born skeptic, didn't know what to do with the material at first. This was the strangest interviews she's ever done, and if she tried to publish them, her career would probably be over. Still, she thought she owned it to Dr. Anderson, whom she didn't even know if he was alive, to somehow get this information out. Hence, she picked a young music producer and web designer she knew about, to help her out. His name was Mark Hempel, who also was a pioneer in internet radio. Even then she wanted to be anonymous, so she packaged the transcripts of the interviews, the artwork, and the audio tapes and sent it via courier to Hempel with not much more of an explanation than something like, "Please publish this material. It's very important." Mark read the interviews and found them fascinating, but had no idea if they were true or not. The anonymous nature of it all perhaps helped him make the decision to publish it. For whatever reason, he created a website at http://wingmakers.com in 1998, where he released the 2 Dr. Anderson interviews, a mythological mini-novel called The Ancient Arrow Project, the audio tapes, the poetry and the artwork. Without even announcing it anywhere, the website quite immediately got hundreds of thousands of visitors and became a blockbuster on the internet. The site became extremely popular and was discussed all over the network, in forums, and otherwise. It was probably the most discussed conspiracy website in the later part of the 1990s. It looked like Dr. Anderson got his information out to a lot of people after all. However, something strange was about to happen.